Welcome back, Chappelle. All right, so welcome back. It's good to see you. We left off in class talking about the civil constitution of the clergy, right? And how now officially the National Assembly and its ability to rule the state has knocked out the power of the king through the Women's March on Versailles. They have knocked out the nobility's power through the night of August the 4th, and they have knocked out the power of the clergy in the civil constitution of the clergy in June of 1790, right? So as things went, right, so they're continuing forward, and we're going to kind of reappear in France in about 1791, right? So about like 6 months after all this stuff goes down, right? And so it's like June of 1791, and they get to the fact that the royal family is under house arrest in a giant palace in the middle of Paris, right? And this is what the palace looks like. And, there we go. And for those of you who already had me for A period, you know the name of this palace. But for my D period kids, if you didn't necessarily get to see this because class ended a little, like 2 seconds early because I had duty, the palace that they're staying in now has this name. It's called the Tuileries. It's called the Tuileries. All right, so this right here is the Tuileries. That is the Tuileries Palace that the royal family is under house arrest inside of, right? So the house arrest that they are under is in this giant palace in the middle of Paris, and it's the former home of all the kings and queens of Paris before, before the French Revolution, right? And before Louis XIV came along and built the Palace of Versailles, right? So now, the Tuileries Palace, though, is the breeding ground for a very major event that occurs during this revolution, right? So if you were Louis, take 2 seconds and try to put yourself in Louis' shoes, right? So if you were Louis and Marie Antoinette and you witnessed the dying light of your power in Paris and in France as overall with this French Revolution, and if you're becoming more and more a part of the fact of an idea creeping into your mind, that as your power continually goes down, there's a chance, right, that your life is no longer safe. Because if their power continues to go down, then there's a good to solid chance that maybe they might kill you, right? So the king and the queen start to become very, very nervous for them and their family's safety during this time period in 1791, right? In about June of 1791. So in June of 1791, they make a big decision together that they are going to try and flee, right? And this event is known as the Flight to Varennes, right? So now Varennes is a city in France about 10 to 20 miles outside of Paris, right? Let's go ahead and double check that just to be safe. Paris to Varennes. Let's see how many miles that is. It's about 250 kilometers. So actually, it's way further than what I just said. So kilometers to miles, 250. Oh, it's actually about 155 miles outside of Paris, right? So it's a ways out, right? But it's not outside of the country, okay? So Varennes is far outside of Paris. However, the king wants to get there for a very certain reason. He knows that there's an army stationed there that is loyal to him still, right? Because do not be arrogant in a sense and believe for a moment that just because the revolution is happening, that Louis has absolutely no supporters, right? Because he does still have several supporters. And one of them happens to be this military division, right? And it's stationed outside of Varennes, right? So it's there. And if they can get there, then they can successfully get to the goal land of Austria, right? Why do they want to get to Austria? Good job, Gomez. That's exactly right, because Marie Antoinette is Austrian, right? And if she's Austrian, then they will have safe haven inside of Austria, right? Because who is the king of Austria? Marie Antoinette's brother, Leopold II, right? So their goal is to get to Austria eventually. So they come up with a plan to escape, right? And their plan was actually suggested to them by this man named von Fersen. And von Fersen is the Swedish favorite of Marie Antoinette. And the favorite is like a trusted advisor or like a cohort, right? And so some people believe they might have been lovers, but there's no like real evidence to support that, right? So anyway, so von Fersen comes up with this idea. He's like, all right, the only way to move quickly in 1791 is by carriage, right? So we're going to get 2 small carriages, so that way it doubles our chance and our ability if one of them breaks, right? And then also small carriages move much faster than bigger ones do, and they take less horses to move them, right? So we get 2 small carriages, each with 2 horses, instead of 1 big carriage with 6 of them, right? And then we'll immediately get outside of the city, and we'll move at a blinding pace. We'll switch horses a couple of times, and then we'll keep on going, and we'll get to Varennes safely. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy, right? So it'll be fine, right? The flight, though, however, is going to fail, and the family is going to be captured. And it's mainly because, how many of you have ever had a family vacation that was supposed to go really, really easily? It was a great plan, but everything just starts going sideways almost immediately, right? Well, that's what happened in this sense as well. During the flight to Varennes, they were convinced to do these things by von Fersen. And then von Fersen tells them, like, look, we're going to leave very late at night before the sun comes up, right? Like around midnight, 1 a.m., okay? We're going to leave like super, super late so no one will see us coming. And then the king and the queen ask him, they're like, wait a minute, what about our outfits? What about our likenesses? People are going to recognize us, right? And von Fersen says, no, we're going to dress you like commoners, right? We're going to dress you like bourgeois members. Like, so we'll give you some decent clothes, but you won't be wearing like your very, very fancy stuff, right? And we're going to dress one of your maids up as a baroness or a noblewoman, right? Because she would be riding in a carriage and she would also have a lot of attendants or workers with her. You will be those workers, right? Von Fersen's like, look, you're going to dress as maids and a butler, right? A valet and some assistants to the baroness, right? And they're like, well, what about our children? What are they going to dress like? They were like, well, it would be very common for a baroness to have like some 3 small assistants with her, and we'll dress them all like girls, right? And now, keep in mind, they have 2 daughters and 1 son, and the son is the Dauphin of France. He's like the prince. And he's like, but I don't want to wear a dress, Daddy. And he's like, shut up and wear it, all right? So they make, like, they're gonna leave in disguise. They're gonna leave in the middle of the night, right? And it's gonna be slick, and they're gonna get out, and they're gonna just go, right? And von Fersen puts the carriages behind the Tuileries Palace and gets them ready. And the night that they're going to leave comes, right? And they're getting dressed up. But, you know, Marie and Louis decide that they're just going to be extremely stupid and then go up to von Fersen and they're like, we really only want to take 1 carriage so we can all stay together. And von Fersen bends, even though he doesn't want to on this, and he then brings in a large carriage that has to be drawn by 6 horses. So now you're going to be moving slower. And if something breaks, then you're going to end up being stopped, right? So this is a big, big, big bad situation, right? And then the other thing that ends up going down is that they are loading the carriages up, and they decide, they're like, okay, we're getting ready. And then out of nowhere, on a surprise inspection, here comes the Marquis de Lafayette, and he walks in. And he's like, oh, hey, what are y'all doing here? Y'all hanging out? Y'all chilling? Y'all just kind of being normal? And they're like, yeah, it's no big deal. We're not planning on escaping or anything. I mean, whatever. What actually ends up happening, Lafayette talks to the king for almost an hour and a half. Puts him way behind schedule, right? And then they finally stop talking, and he finally leaves, and Louis is like, okay, we can go now. And then he leaves right after about 20 minutes, and he was in his room doing something that nobody really knows what the heck he was doing. They were like, why was he taking so long? He was like, don't worry about it, you'll see. And then he like goes ahead and leaves, and he's like, all right, the last one to leave is going to be Marie. Marie's going to come out last. And Marie Antoinette goes out the door, but instead of taking a left, she takes a right, and she ends up wandering around alleyways behind the palace for upwards of an hour. So they're now drastically behind schedule by several hours. And some people are like, the sun's going to come up before we even get outside of Paris. And so they're freaking out, and they're moving very quickly. But remember, a big carriage moving very fast is very conspicuous, right? And they're not meant to move that fast because they will break, which it does, right? The axle breaks on the carriage, and they're in a town outside of Paris. And the stupidest thing you could do is get out of the carriage, right? But what do they do anyway? Louis and Marie get out of the carriage, and a bunch of the people in town see their face. And they're all like, oh, you're the king, right? And they're like, shh, don't tell anybody. We're just going on a family vacation. It's no big deal. Here, have all these silver-plated dishes that we're carrying with us that are very conspicuous that no poor person would ever have, right? Now, meanwhile, while they're messing around trying to fix their carriage, Lafayette is called back to the palace because one of the guards went into the royal bedchamber and found a letter that Louis had left behind. That's what he was doing in the room the whole time when he should have been getting in the carriage. He was writing a letter, and in that letter he was saying, hey, National Assembly, I hate you, and all the changes that you're doing to the government are stupid, and I hate you guys all the same. And when I get to Austria, and when I get out of here, I'm going to bring an army back with me, and I'm going to destroy all of this. You couldn't just be chill about it, could you, Louis, right? And so they see this, not only do they have this letter, but now they know where they're going, right? So they immediately send out sentries to go, like, track them down. And they finally fix the carriage, and the carriage starts moving again. But then all of a sudden, it's early in the morning. It's dusk, right? The sun's about to come up. And here comes a postal worker on a horseback. And he's just like, pulls up next to the carriage, because they're moving kind of slow at the same time. And he looks at him and he waves. And like an idiot, instead of hiding his face, Louis waves back at him. And immediately the postalman pulls out a coin or a piece of money, we're not positive what, piece of money out of his pocket. You're the king of France, Louis. Your face is all over the money. He looks at the face on the money. He looks at the king. He goes, oh, God. And he just hits the horse and goes, wham! And he goes way up ahead, warns the National Assembly guards that they're there, and then these are the guys that show up at the door, and they arrest the royal family because he got recognized off of a piece of money. What a dummy. What a great story, though, too. So the thing about it is, like, now their popularity is officially destroyed, right? Any popularity that they had remaining is now completely shot by this flight to Berlin, this failed fleeing of Paris, right? Now, at the beginning of the revolution, the bourgeois were the ones in charge, right? The bourgeois were leading everything. They were using the mob of Paris to do all their dirty work, and they're kind of really, really, like, amped up right now, right? But they were not the ones out in the streets storming the Bastille. They're not the ones out there getting really ferocious and aggressive. That's the mob doing that, right? The mob of Paris is burning the Bastille down and cutting heads off and putting them on sticks. And the women of the mob of Paris are the ones storming Versailles, right? So the mob gets very aggressively upset, and they're like, the bourgeois, you were in charge, and you almost let the king leave, right? So we're tired of this crap. So what ends up happening is after the failed flight, the mob of Paris demands more violence and more action. And so they decide to organize themselves, and they create themselves into a group. And that group has a specific look, right? And you see these guys right here. These are all members of the new Mob of Paris group, and their new group is called the Sans-Culottes, right? The Sans-Culottes, right? The Sans-Culottes, literally translated into English, means without pants, all right? So as in no pants, right? Now, as you can see, they are actually, oh, no. As you can see in the picture, they are actually wearing pants, but they're not just Winnie the Poohing it all over the place, right? Just going straight t-shirt and no bottoms. They are actually wearing pants, but these pants are not what are called breeches, right? Breeches are these like really tight pants that the bourgeois would wear, symbolizing their money, right? So the sans-culottes, on the other hand, they wore loose-fitting trousers like a working man of Paris would wear, right? You wouldn't see like a blacksmith wearing breeches. You'd see him wearing trousers that he could move around in a little bit, right? And so that's what they wore. They wore these loose trousers, right? Trying to show that they were the poor of France, the regular people, the blue collar, right? And so they organized the mob members, and they become the radical revolutionary citizens, right? They love violence, and they love simple solutions, and they kind of become like this roaming militia, right? So the sans-culottes also is indicative of something very important. The rise of these things called clubs, right? And no, I don't mean a club like this kind of club, right? That's a kind of club like a dance club where this guy in the background seems like he might be raising the roof at any moment, which nobody wants to see, right? The clubs instead here are called the Jacobins. This is the club I'm talking about, right? A group of men. The two biggest clubs are called the Jacobins and the Girondins, right? The Jacobins are the really, really aggressively violent ones, right? The radical ones, the extreme ones, right? They're violent. They use the sans-culottes kind of like their own little personal army. And then you got the Girondins, and they're moderate, and they resist violence, right? They want politically to solve the revolution, okay? So the thing about these two clubs, they're kind of like political parties, right? We're coming up on election time soon, and so y'all know what a political party is, right? So the Jacobins, or the Jacobins and the Girondins are like these two new political factions, right? Then neither one of them really like the king by this point, but the Girondins want to keep the king where the Jacobins do not. They want to be a republic, and they want to get rid of the king, and they want to execute him, right? So as you can see, one is very chill, the other one is very extreme, right? So the Girondins are very chill, and then the Jacobins are very intense, right? So the Jacobins and the Girondins are now going to power. I give them nicknames, and I like to call them the Jerrys and the Garys. Right? The Jerrys are the ones that are super intense and very radical. Remember, Jerry from Tom and Jerry, like, borderline kills that cat every episode, right? He's very violent. Whereas the Garys are very, very calm, and very collected, and very mellow, right? So they're very, meow, they're very, very relaxed, okay? So the biggest thing going forward, though, as well, is as these things begin to spiral out of control, then all of a sudden, new revolutionary France decides that it wants to go to war. Why is this a terrible idea? You're a brand new country pretty much. You just got rid of your king. You don't even necessarily have a super organized military yet, right? But they end up going to war. Why? It's mainly due to the fact that, because remember, everyone else in Europe is ran by an absolutist. It wasn't the fact that France decides to go declare war on everybody out of spite, like they're just getting too big for their britches. Get it? Britches, sansculottes, you understand. Now, instead, it becomes a thing because these absolutists are worried about their ideas spreading to their countries. So a lot of these absolutists decide to mobilize their own armies and decide that they want to try and knock out this whole new French Revolution thing and protect Louis and Marie Antoinette from being killed, right? Because the other European powers are mobilizing out of fear, right? So like Prussia and Austria and Russia and all these other groups are getting armies ready to go because they have absolutists and they want to keep it that way, right? They don't want the poor people in their countries to realize that they could have a revolution if they actually get the chance, right? So they want to form big groups of armies called coalitions, and they want to stomp out the new French government as quickly as they can, right? So the new French government decides, we're going to beat you to it, and they're going to organize their army, and they declare war on Austria early, right? And that leads to the War of the First Coalition, which we will talk about tomorrow. I will see you guys then. I hope you all have a great evening. Have a good one.